Hi, very good morning. Welcome to the session on the Cloud Architect series. So today's session, we are going to cover 11 things about cloud architecture. This is one of the most asked questions by a lot of my students. So I just thought I'll just put it together, all what we have done in the last 5 to 10 years as an architect. Specifically, what are the things we need to take care if you're aspiring to be an architect in solutioning side, technical side, infrastructure side, blah, blah, blah. So we'll get started and know about 11 things about cloud architecture. So when you visit any job sites, you could see like there is humongous amount of job opportunities in the architectural roles. It could be a technical role or a tech architect role, solution architect roles. So understanding them becomes very difficult unless you have done it all inside an organization. So I'm going to share those kind of perspectives in this video, which could really help you to align to this video and then start learning them as a lesson. So let's get started. So the first thing about the cloud architecture role is the architectural governance. So this is less understood. So every organizations could have something called as an architecture review board. Now governance is one of the key job of an architect. Basically, anything which is delivered on a software from a delivery team, the key guys who are responsible to ensure that they form all the non-functional requirement and they try to cater to the needs of the customers will be part of the governance process. So it's a practice, okay, and it will orient by which the enterprise, solution, application, data, business, infrastructure, security architectures are well managed and controlled within an enterprise, basically. Okay. So what do an ARB do? They do a lot of peer reviews. Okay. They ensure that the correct architecture is put, the best practice is being driven, the design needs are aligned with the policies and standards of a customer. Okay, they create a lot of these reusable patterns, okay, and translate the strategy and roadmap so that the implementation is more aligned. So this is one of the very key parts, like you might become an peripheral or internal to an architecture review board, but you need to understand as a budding architects that ARB is a board, which is a very key architecture review board is one of the key board within an architect practice. Now with cloud coming in, this is pretty more complex because the delivery is very short. You need to look at some delivery kind of a 2 month, 1 month, and basically you need to really build this up on the fly. Okay, so that's the first point. From a job role perspective, this is a lot of things which keeps coming to me. So for example, in my role, I have started like a technical architect, then you move up the ladders, get into solutioning, which is more broader in nature than going down to the tools and technologies. Then you become an enterprise architect. You could also then move into a customer facing roles, which is typically to put the blueprints and future roadmap, etc., right? So job roles are plenty, but basically the job roles of an architect will involve maybe doing design, the HLD diagram, LLD diagrams, okay, understanding the technical requirements, creating the ROM and SOW, creating the strategy, roadmap, making the solution and domain principles very right, ensuring the security is being done, blah, 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 working with the fellow stakeholders of your customer, internal team of your organizations. So job roles of an architect is a very unlimited kind of a model because one, you could tell that you are working on the non-functional side, which is basically your performance, security. But the other side, you're also responsible into the entire life cycle of the delivery. If the life cycle is something like a waterfall model, it becomes easy for you. But if it is something like an agile model, it becomes more complex because you need to review this every now and then so that the principles are really driven, right? So we all know like DevOps is another way by which you deliver software, and the architect job role becomes more very agile in that kind of process to review the things. So the job roles are very important. So when you go into the job sites, you can see that if you are a very tech savvy guy, you apply for technical architect. If you are a guy who knows business well and you're able to draw the business diagrams, you have a business architect role. Overall roadmaps, strategy, you have an enterprise architecture role. So security is another area. So you get a lot of kind of varieties. So architecture practice is basically pretty complex because what an architect's practice delivers could be looked at. So I'll give you my experiences. You could look at that as a cost center, which is basically somebody is trying to spend more time with architecture to ensure that delivery is smooth, but it is moving out as architecture as a service down the line, because it means like it is a value additions to the entire project, because the amount of time you will spend post delivery will be very less if architects have been playing a very key role in your life cycle of a project. So for example, for the enterprise services, for the shared services, the ops management, compliance, information security, for networking, for master data management, for every area you speak about, for a business like CRM, ERP, each of these areas you might build a kind of an horizontal, functional, vertical practice within the architecture team, and these resources can be provided. So it's like a practice how you run for, maybe if it's a Java practice, .NET practice, Salesforce practice, Azure practice, AWS practice. Similarly, you can have an architect practice which is trying to deliver the entire thing day in, day out. And what they're really going to do here as a process is, when the business requirement come, they will enter into any of this architect practice. They're going to review these documents as a gating kind of thing, and then it might go to a review board, and finally there is a unit test, acceptance test, and finally it gets out of the entire as a reviewed outcome. Okay, so architect practice is very important because it allows you to really look at the entire thing from a perspective of how they align into an organization's approach, because every organization is already having some kind of a systems and processes which is ready to be utilized. Well, let's move on to the next thing from a stakeholder perspective. This is very key for us to understand, because most of the time we feel that the stakeholders are typically only the architects, but they work in a big team. Now, the teams in which you can see the architect team works is, there is development team, which is a very key stakeholders. Then there is a team from customer who's looking at this, and there could be team which are typically business guys. The stakeholders are plenty. There could be senior management like CIOs and all part of this team, because continuous improvement is one of the key things. So in a modern cloud era, what we see is the DevOps team, the delivery team which is managing that DevOps, is working along with them is very, very important. And here slightly there is a change in terms of how you deliver your entire software. Okay. Next point is about the strategic transformation, which is a very important topic for today's, because we are in the era of digital transformation. We are in the era how you will improve operational efficiency. We are in the era how you do business modernizations. So, and the stakeholders for all of them might be different. So basically, architectural practice is going to really help an organizations and customers do these strategic transformations. For example, if there is a customer who is developing new software, you might tell the cloud native or cloud first is an approach you take from an architectural principles. Okay, so that you can do fast provisioning, scalability, standardization, blah blah blah. Right. Now, this might be a very interesting charter for a person like a CIO or a chief operating officer. Basically, they're looking at how you can transform the IT, okay, by doing some digital transformations with the CDOs, blah, 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 okay. Similarly, transforming the customer experience is becoming a very important job of an architect, because he doesn't just work on the technology side, but look at how the mobile devices or intelligent services, the chatbots, the AI kind of omni-channel approach are all really getting integrated into the stiff. Okay, the difference between an architecture and architect can be a little bit boring at times, because you have to look at it from a practical delivery perspective. I'll give you a very nice example. A research and development team might be very excited in terms of trying to create a bot of the future. And then it might come back to an innovation guy who's trying to take that research piece and trying to think in terms of how they can fit into an insurance company, into basically a financial company. And then you have a delivery team who started thinking along with the horizontal and vertical practice how to deliver this using Java, using Python, blah, blah, blah. And then when an architect guy comes, he starts asking the dry questions. Is it really worth to deliver it? Is it secure? Can it scale? Blah, blah, blah. So you see that a lot of enemies getting built on the top of it. Because the reason is because architect is not something which we want to really look at it from fancy things, but we want to ensure that will this be scalable? If it works for 150 people, will it work for 150,000 people, right? It's fine that you ask a question in chatbot and you're able to get something from an HCM or an ERP, but how secure it is from a traffic perspective. Okay, so these are things which you need to understand. The transformations can be also from a business side in terms of trying to embed a lot of things in from a business transformation perspective. So architect is a strategic transformation jobs. The enterprise architecture, business transformation, digital transformation all needs to have a piece of this. So we have worked with customers who are looking at cloud native as one of the transformation projects. There could be customers who are looking at moving their entire value chain into the AI kind of world. So all these involve a lot of thinking, right? So from an outcome perspective, it's a very important area to really focus on what do you deliver, because sometimes if you don't have an outcome, it is always question. You can keep talking, but what are the deliverables, right? So capability design is one of the deliverables. So solution designing is one of the key job of an architecture, right? So they do the capability design, application design. It could be a catalog design. Okay, you could do an environmental catalog. You will do something like a sizing model from a deployment design. You do a service design from service-oriented architecture, the Raki matrix, okay, and the commercial part. Okay, don't underestimate an architect is always a techie guy. The sizing component of any of the software is really being vetted with an architect because he understands technology to the depth. So the BOM, the contract are also getting built with him. The transition design is also involves a lot of outcomes from an architect, like an adoption plan, migration plan, development plan, deployment plan, how to really ensure that once it's rolled out, you can really deliver the next versions. Okay, what are the components getting utilized? Are they obsolete? Is there a possibility of they getting migrated into the new stacks? It's a continuous process, right? So what we have seen is there are a lot of tools available. Tools are just enablers, but you need a mind to work with the tools to really deliver those stuff. From a quality perspective, this is a very interesting thing. From an architecture quality perspectives, you need to have a large design standards. Okay, for example, the ARC might look at it from a the architecture quality on how many design documents have been complete. Is there a documentation of all the design documents, right? So quality, I could mean like more of how you can sign off something at a metrics or an SLA level. So it's very difficult to build these metrics, but delivery has got a lot of these metrics. So you actually get imbibed into it normally, but I would recommend that it is always outside that, because you can see this from a 360-degree view. Like for example, if you're working on a very critical security project, so there is something which is built into the delivery team in terms of what's secure, but an architect looks at it from a different perspective. So you may have to build the metrics into it and then look at how you can monitor. So architecture quality is a debatable topic. So we have seen that every customers or every vendor can have a list of metrics which you want to measure it, and then you can drive those metrics within the architecture practice. So architecture and the delivery is a very interesting area. The reason why it is very interesting is because we are moved from the waterfall model into a agile kind of a model. So it is becoming very difficult now. For example, in a waterfall model, you have business requirements, then there is an architecture and design, then there is the development, testing and release, right? That's how waterfall model works. But in an agile model, basically what you do is you define a concept, and then you define a scope, and then there is a solution architect, there is a product backlog which you create, which is an initial product backlog, there is an iteration backlog, and finally there is a development iteration, there is an integration test. And all these things, like from the PR to UC to AP to Node, which is the enterprise architecture, have to get built into this entire model of an agile model. So this becomes a little bit complicated. So architecture from a delivery perspective today, all the architects who have been trained on the TOGAF and the Zachman's frameworks and all these models will have to really fine tune into these new frameworks and really see what the customer is looking at. So even agile is evolving day by day. There are a lot of new things like models which are coming up. So the architecture alignment becomes very important. So I would recommend you have a governance blueprint which is getting built based on the customer, based on the offshore development center, and then you keep updating it regularly based on the customer needs, or you can make custom versions of it for every customer and get an approval from the review board. The next point is about tools and frameworks. I think we are aware of this. I'm not going to touch this because this is a common thing which everybody tries to be aware of, because tools, frameworks was the way how things used to work in the past, right? Basically, we had UML diagrams, rational rows, somebody who gets TOGAF certifications, somebody who really practices the Zachman's framework, there is a domain-driven design. So this still exists. The principles of architectures don't change between different worlds, okay? But you'll have to just fine-tune that. So the recommendation is, as an architect, it's good to go through all these frameworks, get the foundation right so that you're really prepared for your next level of assignments. My favorite topic, design patterns, a very, very key important thing, because I just want to take some examples for you in design pattern, because this is one of the core area for architect to practice. Because what you see in the development team is they're excellent developers. They are good Python developers, Java developers, .NET, Ruby on Rails. There is innovation team trying to talk about a lot of new deliveries, quite kicked off team in a delivery. But when it comes to you really start thinking in terms of is this reusable? Is it scalable? Okay, is the patterns getting registered? Is there a way by which you're trying to record these services in a service catalog so that it can be utilized? You'll see a big no. And nobody seems to be interested in that. Second, while you are developing a software, do you build these kind of patterns as part of your story? This is the another part, right? So you have a lot of patterns. Let me take a few examples from a microservices perspective, which is the current thing on cloud native, etc. If you're talking about a single responsibility pattern, I'm just using some terminology for viewers to really go and do further reading. We'll do a separate session on pattern, maybe an entire workshop for 10 days on the patterns, with such a huge topic. Okay, but high level, for example, if you're talking about a single responsibility principle. So if you're building a microservice, it must be responsible for a specific feature or a functionality or an aggregation of a cohesive or a functionality. Okay, so you will use a single responsibility principle, but how many of the developers know it in advance? So they're going to just deliver software. Right? Similarly, you have domain-driven design, loose coupling, okay, separations of concerns is another thing, right? Basically, you can see that all these are different kind of patterns which are used. Autonomy is another pattern. Fault tolerance is a pattern. Design principles, there are design principles like composability, discoverability. So these are things which are very, very important for a developer to understand as he develops the software, which should be part of it. From a pattern perspective, you could tell like it's a decomposition pattern, strangler pattern, it could be integration pattern, it could be aggregator pattern. These are all just examples. I just want to be a client-side UI composition pattern, shared database per service pattern, command query responsibility segregations, CQRS. So let's take a CQRS example. So when we implement a database per service, there is a requirement to query, okay, which requires join data from multiple services. It's not possible. So how do we implement queries in a microservice architecture is solved by the CQRS. Okay, so what does CQRS suggest? splitting the application into two parts, the command side and the query side. The command will handle the create, update, and delete request. The query side will handle the query part by using the materialized view. Okay, that's an example. Similarly, you have Saga pattern, blah, blah, blah. See, the idea of bouncing words as part of this is you will always see that these patterns are not well understood by the development team. And how do we do this now? You deliver it, testing team tries to get a lot of problems in performance, scalability, and then they go back to and fro. It's not very predictive, it's not very proactive, and there are super essential items in delivery. Similarly, if you're looking at cross-cutting concern patterns, if you erstwhile Steve Jobs talking about connecting the dots, right? So basically that works very well in architecture practice, because cross-cutting is a service, for example, typically can call other services. Okay, for each environment like dev, QA, UAT, production, same configuration might be different. The configuration may not be the same. A change in any of those properties might require a rebuild and redeployment of the service. So these are something which you can avoid by externalization of all the configuration, including the endpoint, URL, credentials, blah, 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 right? So cross-cutting pattern is something which you should think well in advance. So for example, you given a job of trying to implement a service which is going to update a record which is very distributed in nature. You might need to have a knowledge of these things. You may need to get trained on this, okay? Similarly, you have the circuit breaker pattern, blah, blah. So design pattern, the reason I spend a lot of time, is a very key topic for all of us to know. From an architect process perspective, I still see it's a work in progress. Even though a lot of people claim that it's all like TOGAF, Zachman, you don't have it for a modern world. So practically what I have done while building and practice within organization is you have to start from the scratch, build the ARP as the first layer by which you can review all the things within organizations. Organize the team very well. So team building is very important once you have the ARP. Recruit the right architects who has a flair for those kind of portfolio, whether it's a security, whether it is enterprise, whether it is database. You need to really identify whether it is something to do with business, enterprise, technology, okay, or domain. So once you build the ARP, once you build the team, there must be a well-defined process, which is very complicated today because there are some projects, most of the projects are delivered through a DevOps process, and there is always a fight of the deadline with your quality, right? So people just tell, let me get it out, and then they start struggling. So architects process have to be built within organizations. It needs a governance, it needs a quality process, it has to be reviewed, right? So last but not the least, the reason why architects will be highest paid in any organization is because they are responsible for the delivery, right? So if something goes wrong in the delivery process, which if they are accountable for why the system is slow, okay, they're accountable for why there is a security breach. They're accountable to work with their end customer to see that there is no down time. So they're trying to curtail or censor the curiosity and innovation in an organization. That's not a negative point, because if you put something onto a chatbot and something goes wrong, then you're in a big soup, right? So basically, architects does a very interesting jobs. Hope all of you should dream to become an architect if you're in a technical line at some point of time. You'll enjoy it. It's a pretty real job, and architects in every domain is interesting. Whenever you see a building which is really demanding your eye, it means like it's been built with a lot of thinking, right? You can't really change it after it's built. Similar thing happens in software. The only flexibility you get in software is you're able to test it, re-release it, and get commercial back from end customers. Okay, the days are gone now on doing that. Now you need to be proactive, you need to have fast delivery. Cloud is encouraging you to deliver things in 2 months, 3 months, not 2 years, 3 years. It's going to be a very interesting model to look at. For any of the vendors which you would have touched today, like Google Cloud Platform, Azure Platform, Amazon Web Services, Oracle Cloud, Sales, you'll see all of them have some governance of architecture which they release, but that's the starting point. For example, Amazon has got something called as an AWS well-architected framework. You can go to the Azure Architect Center to download some blueprints in terms of what they do. Similarly, Google Cloud has got some architectural principles. So Oracle has got some of the practices which you can drive through an architecture. So everybody has got something to get started, but it's a commonsensical thing to really think across what you do with those starting points and build these services. And again, to end this talk by telling it is connecting the dots job. Basically, there are a lot of ambiguities, a lot of uncertainties in a system. You're trying to knit it together by making the abstractions more controllable. You can't make it 100% run always. And that's going to be a beautiful thing to do as an architect. So thanks for watching. We'll get to the next session, something to do with design patterns